Evening, everyone. Hello. Well, what's in the news today? We'll go as we usually do with some question a bit. I thought might be worth just updating with the latest. In fact, there's a comment there about Rishi Sunak. He has made a statement about the BBC route, and there is another comment about saying there's various other things to the BBC route. There is indeed. The BBC has not been on form in the last week. There was the support for domestic violence, which they then had to say, no, we find domestic violence abhorrent, and yet, well, they made a statement supporting it. Removing David Attenborough's series from the BBC, it'll only be on the iPlayer because it's going to upset some Conservatives because it's about climate change. And then, of course, the Gary Lineker round. They've also, by the way, I don't know if anyone's seen, they've also today had to apologise for allowing Nadine Dorries on one of their programmes to tell lies about the Keir Starmer-Sue Gray situation last week. So, but the problem with that is when you allow it to happen and then you apologise later, it's not really very good because loads of people see the person lying on your current affair programme. If you tackled it there and then, if a presenter or whoever's running the show there and then says, hang on a minute, is what you're saying correct? Then everyone then gets to see them called out. If you apologise for it a week later in a minor press release that no one reports on, nobody sees it. But Rishi Sunak, so we've had this row now. It's been brewing all week. Rishi Sunak, not a word. Then it went ballistic yesterday, not a word. Rishi Sunak has now, in the last hour or so, something like that, a couple of hours maybe, I can't remember, has now decided to say something. What has he said? Nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. This is a matter for the BBC and Gary Lineker. I hope they resolve it quickly. Nothing to do with me. And it's, from my point of view, is in a way, yes, I don't want government getting involved in these sort of things. But the thing is, what you don't get to do, and I accept that Rishi Sunak personally hasn't done this, but the Conservatives have. The Conservative government have put people into decision-making positions within the BBC, as is their right. The government do make appointments to the BBC. So they have put people into positions. Those people have now created a massive political storm. And now the Tories are going, nothing to do with us, nothing to do with us. And it is. You have to take responsibility. If you take over leadership of a political party, you have to take responsibility for what happened under the previous leader as well, and the ones before that. That's what leadership's been about. I would be absolutely fine with Rishi Sunak saying I shouldn't get involved if his party hadn't already been involved. Plus, there's about 36 Tory MPs now formally calling for Gary Lineker to face a full investigation. I've got no problems with a full investigation, by the way, an independent investigation, because it should turn up some WhatsApp messages between the various decision makers as well. I would not mind an investigation at all, but I don't think that's what they're after. Parson Road saying there, when someone complained to the BBC about Andrew Neil's frequent right-wing political tweets and spectator writers, the BBC said he was a freelancer, his own personal views. See, Andrew Neil's an interesting one. So there's lots of people come out with various things. So the BBC have defended the rights of Andrew Neil to say what he likes because he's a freelancer. Gary Lineker, a few years ago, someone tried to make an issue of Gary Lineker talking about support for another Brexit referendum, a second referendum. Someone complained. The BBC said, as a sports presenter, he's entirely entitled to express views on his own platforms, basically privately. Chris Packham, Alan Sugar, all of these people, and of all of them, the BBC's guidelines do actually make clear that there are certain impartiality rules for some people and not for others. And it doesn't apply to Gary Lineker for two reasons. First, well, mostly because he's a sports presenter. The BBC guidelines, despite what the Daily Mail are saying, specifically exclude people who do not contribute to the BBC's news and politics content. So Gary Lineker is purely a sports presenter on the BBC, football. He does sometimes do other sports as well, but I mean, obviously only talks about football. So he is free from it. Andrew Neil, on the other hand, has in the past contributed to the BBC's news and politics content. So actually, Andrew Neil should have fallen foul of those guidelines. So they shouldn't have said that they don't apply to him just because he's a freelancer. Their guidelines say that Andrew Neil should have been bound by them. But Gary Lineker, Chris Packham, even Alan Sugar, not so much. So it's absolutely nonsense. And I'll tell you what will happen here. Obviously, Gary Lineker's not going to back down. Why would he? What on earth have the BBC got to what leverage have they got over him? None at all. So one of two things surely now has to happen. I can't imagine another scenario anyway. One of two things has to happen. One, the BBC back down, at which point they then have to point the finger at someone who's made a cock up. So someone will be made the fall guy for this hideous cock up. The BBC will have to admit that Gary Lineker has not broken any guidelines, because he's not going to apologise. He's not going to say he got any aspect of his behaviour wrong, because why should he? So that's one possibility, the BBC forced into a humiliating climb down. The second possibility is that they stand firm and Gary Lineker takes them to court. And there it will have to emerge that he has not broken any guidelines, because then they're not playing to the public gallery. In court, the BBC will have to demonstrate that Gary Lineker has breached his contract with them. Well, they're not going to be able to, are they? So they're going to look very, very stupid. Then you'll have an actual, like a judgment, a court judgment that states that the BBC were in the wrong. And, however this turns, so really the BBC, I saw someone saying today, there was like a report on something, this row erupted and there's no exit strategy on either side. It's like, well, Lineker doesn't need an exit strategy. The BBC need an exit strategy, because Gary Lineker, if this ends up in court, and of course he's wealthy enough to take it to court, if he wants to make a really big issue of this, he can do. He can make as big an issue as he likes. And he is completely in the right. But anyway. So Rishi's stopped boats, has he? Now he's set up an expensive jail in Calais, not a claim processing centre. Well, I mean, as I said in the video today, see, the way I would look at it, this detention centre in northern France will presumably take some time to build. What do you reckon? Do you reckon it'll be built just after the next election? I reckon it might be. In which case, Labour can suddenly turn around and go, do you know what? We'll just use this as a processing centre. Obviously, they'll have to find the staff. I mean, it's not going to be all set up for them. The facilities may be, but Labour will need to hire and train staff to deal with the asylum applications, because that's what's been missing for years. Not enough people to process the applications, otherwise we won't have the issue. In fact, Darren's just saying then, 2018, Lineker tweeted about second referendum. BBC covered the story, said that Lineker is a freelance presenter, was entitled to have his own opinions. They don't reflect the BBC's. Yeah, well, there are, mostly it is though, because as I say, their guidelines specifically say these things that people are pointing to about the impartiality. I mean, first of all, impartiality doesn't always mean what some people are saying anyway, but it specifically says it's for people who contribute to the news and political output of the BBC. And it also specifically says it doesn't apply to blah, 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 blah. And sports presenters is in that list of people it doesn't apply to. So the BBC, you could argue the BBC don't have, like a lot of organisations, doesn't really have a robust social media policy. Probably because the people who make the policies don't understand it. But it does have clear rules. And the rules clearly states that Gary Lineker hasn't broken any rules. I mean, the thing, there's been various people trying to use football and analogies about Gary Lineker being shown the red card or arguing the ref or something like that. Gary Lineker, I think, is in a unique position in the modern football game. Unique in that he was never booked as a player. I don't think that applies to any other professional player in the modern era. So he is provably someone who, well, if he didn't always play by the rules, was very crafty about it, should we put it that way, he certainly never got booked. But anyway, John saying, I don't watch much football, but enough to know Lineker is an able, intelligent commentator, analyst. His wave of no, I'm Spartacus by others must be upsetting a lot of fans. There will be some who are upset, and they'll blame Lineker and others. But there seems to be, from what I can tell, plenty that are upset with the BBC here. Because at the end of the day, like, here's the thing, right? A lot of these football fans that will want to watch Match of the Day, they are probably, if I'm gonna sort of profile people, you can well imagine quite a lot of them may themselves not have agreed with Lineker's statement. They may themselves be anti-immigration. They may be in favour of Rishi Sunak's plans, even though they don't understand them. It doesn't matter. They may approve of them because most of the public do. Most of the public are anti-immigration. It's unfortunate that people aren't given the facts on the matter, but they're not. So quite a lot of these football fans who wanted to watch Match of the Day probably did not agree with Lineker's statement. But it doesn't matter, because Lineker didn't make that statement on Match of the Day, nor was he threatening to. He was only going to be talking about football on Match of the Day. So even for the people who won't agree with Lineker, they will surely know, most of them will know, that the reason their football schedule's been disrupted today, for those who can't physically go to the match or watch Sky, is not because of Gary Lineker. It's because of the BBC, and by extension the Tories, because it's the Tories who... No one's going to believe the BBC shot themselves out of a cannon, because that's what they've done, right into a mountain, Wile E. Coyote like. You know, it clearly come from political pressure. No one can argue that, and you know where the political pressures come from. Lineker aside, what about Sir David Attenborough? Well, this is... So I will be doing a video on this tomorrow, but here's what I would say. For quite a few years now, it's been evidence that the Conservatives have been actively putting, not just supporters, I have no issue with people in senior positions at the BBC being Conservatives, because, you know, I would think that a lot of intelligent, inquisitive people will have political beliefs. And it's fine for those political beliefs. I mean, a lot of people have political beliefs without party political beliefs. You know, they may have certain political beliefs that don't really fit to any one party, and so they don't belong to any one party. But plenty of them will. Plenty of them will support a party, and that's fine. I've got no issue with that at all. The issue is not whether they are impartial, it's whether their work is impartial. So I am a political beast, I'm a party political beast, and I have been for many, many years. But as a teacher, I never, ever pushed my political views onto my students, because that would have been unprofessional. I was easily able to separate and become like a devil's advocate in any discussions to do with politics in my classrooms. So, you know, and I would expect people working in the BBC to do that. But the Conservatives over some years have been putting people into position who are not just Conservative supporters, but Conservative activists. You know, people who want to push a particular agenda, a political agenda at the BBC, instead of just doing what's best for the corporation and to inform the public when it comes to the news coverage. And this has been going on for years, and it's been obvious for years. But something changed last week. All of a sudden, see, what used to be the case is, what did it affect? It affected their political news output, and sometimes wider news as well. So for the first few of those years, it very clearly impacted the political news, and it still does. So, for example, Question Time, as far as I know, because they said they did this last year, was it year or the year before, they make sure that the audience is made up of 52% Brexit voters, 48% Remain voters. Goodness knows what happens if you want to go on the show and you don't vote either way. Yeah, and that from a 2016 poll. Well, so, you know, and we see, and Nigel, the only MEPs who ever appeared on Question Time were UKIP or Brexit Party MEPs, never any others. you know, and all of these things, and you know, Andrew Marr, we can see what Andrew Marr's like now. He now gets to commentate properly now that he's away from the BBC. But when he was on the BBC, he had to toe the Tory line there as well. So we can see the influence, but it was contained within, which was damaging enough, news and politics. But now it's spread. So the Gary Lineker thing means it's now sport. So that Tory influence has now leached into sport. The David Attenborough thing means that it's now leached into like their educational content, their science and educational content. So now what we can see is that the whole BBC corporation has now started to suffer from the rot. So, and I, you know, the last time I discussed the BBC dropping the ball, I would have said, and I say, I think in every video where I attack what the BBC has done, because I've done a few, and I would say that it's a shame to knock the entire corporation, because the BBC is huge, for what is, after all, one small team. The political news team is what's letting the side down. It is a very small part of the overall corporation. But now, because they started to put these people in positions, in decision-making positions in and around the news teams, but now it's gone right to the top of the organisation. So now it's feeding into everything. And, you know, I think someone asked towards the beginning, what can the BBC do to get themselves out of this mess? If you mean the general mess, there is nothing the BBC can do for itself, because it's not a person. Ultimately, the mess has been created because of the government deliberately trying to choose people who would be politically biased and pursue a political agenda. So the only way to fix it is to remove those people and replace them with people who will act for the good of the corporation. Ideally, not a ministerial appointment. Ideally, you set up an independent panel. It can even be of MPs. An independent panel of cross-party MPs. You know, you can make sure that it's not heavily in favour of any one party. Like in a lot of select committees, often if it's an important select committee, there will be a majority of the party of government. Well, you could say no, you know, and you could say maybe you have a panel where you've got 3 Labour MPs, 3 Conservative MPs, because they're the largest parties, 2 MPs from the SNP, and then you could have like 1 from the Lib Dems, well, Caroline Lucas if she wants to be, you know, 1 from the DUP, SDLP, Alliance Party, you know, you could 1 from each party, 2 from the SNP and 3 from Labour, 3 from the Conservatives. That way no party is a majority of that committee. A majority of that committee will agree on a suitable candidate. Something like that. Just something like that. Where it's MPs still deciding, not the government, and no one party basically gets the say. BBC's World Service, one of the most respected news services. Yeah, and that was massively cut back last year. That was so stupid. Massively scaled back, and it's one of our like most effective exports. But anyway, can I please explain how damaging this could be for Sunak, and could Tim, David Richard Sharp be forced out? Would Sunak then be more careful in the next appointment? It needn't be. Well, it could be damaging to Sunak. It depends how it goes. Obviously, it's quite clear that, see, the problem is with picking on Match of the Day, it was so stupid, because you're basically picking on, like, football programmes used to be effectively fans doing them. People like Jimmy Hill, okay, he was a sort of footballer. Jimmy Greaves was a good footballer, but you know, they were almost like football fans. They weren't necessarily that great at the analysis. So, but what's happened in the last few decades, not just the BBC, ITV and so on as well, They haven't just got players of varying abilities to front these programs. They've got particularly clever strategic players, not just players who were good themselves, but players who were leaders. So what you have, I mean, like Gary Lineker, you know, and Alan Shearer, of course, former England captains, but Ian Wright as well was a leader. And you know, you've got people who weren't just quick with their feet or could stick the ball in the back of the net. They were people who understood the strategy. That makes them very good at analysing the game. So the professionalism of football punditry has increased massively over these years. But the thing about these players is that they were at the top of their game and made a lot of money as a professional footballer. The male ones especially, maybe the female ones not so much, although the female ones have also come out in support. So you can't get them to back down by threatening their jobs, because for two reasons. First of all, they're incredibly wealthy. Their living standard doesn't have to drop one iota because the BBC sack them. And second of all, they're good at what they do. They're absolutely brilliant. So they will be snapped up by someone else. Because Sky and ITV and so on, they've got their own pundits, and some of them are decent. But, you know, they would love to have, I mean, ITV, I think, used to have Ian Wright. They'd love to have someone like Gary Lineker and Alan Shearer on as well. I think Alan Shearer has sometimes done things for other channels. You know, and it doesn't work. You can't pick on footballers like this. It just doesn't work. They've got nothing to threaten them with. Nothing at all. 30p Lee was interviewed the other day, basically said we can't fight on politics, it'll have to be the culture wars. Well, this is very much like Jacob Rees-Mogg. I hadn't actually seen that one, by the way. This would be like very much like Jacob Rees-Mogg in 2019 when he was asked on LBC, why don't you support a second referendum to deal with the deadlock? And he said, quite matter-of-factly, you know, he didn't have to be trapped into it. He said, quite honestly, because people would vote to reverse Brexit. You know, he says they would vote to remain. That's what he said. But there you go. By the way, your cat Cleo, who's in your room with me, disapproves of the BBC situation too. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of cats, I have to say. I'm not a fan of our cat either. Our cat actually is an arsehole. But you know what? My partner was away on a 2-day conference this week. Now, what happens is, see, the cat and the dogs don't get on. The cat, I think the cat and the dogs are both inbred. I think they're, like, the dogs are pugs. Pugs are stupid anyway, but I think they're stupid even for pugs. But the cat is also quite stupid. But they don't get on anyway, and I'm not just blaming it on the fact that they've got no brains. I'm sure it's us not being very good at training animals. So the cat and the dogs have to be kept apart, is what I'm saying. So what happens is, each evening, when we put the dogs out, the cat comes in and my partner strokes the cat for a bit till we let the dogs back in. So I was on that duty on whenever it was, Tuesday? I think it was Tuesday. And do you know what? I stroked her for 12 minutes solid, non-stop. My arm was aching. Not one single purr out of that ungrateful feline. Miserable cat. Not that I particularly like the sound of purring, but I am generally told that she purrs when my partner strokes her. And she obviously was happy with my stroking abilities, because she just laid there and let me stroke her and didn't make any sounds. Not even a purr. But there we are. I've never really liked cats. What credence should we give to Savanta's latest poll results? The Express were current that Tories had cut Labour's lead to 11 points, which they believe is a result of the anti-immigration policy. Well, they'll always say things like that, won't they? Not what I would say is not too much. I always say the only two pollsters who, in isolation, I would say you can treat their results as reasonably reliable are YouGov and Ipsos Mori. And the reason I say that is not only are they quite open about their methodology and it's all sound, but also they've proven themselves with their pre-election polls and then the election results. They're pretty good. They both do it in very different ways, but they also both deliver pretty good results. And YouGov are very, very good. Over the last few years, they've really proven themselves. The other pollsters, not so much. So with the other pollsters, I would tend to look at poll of polls and maybe like aggregate them or something. I wouldn't pick on any one of the others and go, oh, unless they're doing something that you can't really get wrong and they're the only ones doing it. Like Redfield and Wilton do some interesting stuff on what the public think about certain policy areas. I mean, you shouldn't be able to get that badly wrong. Whereas actually voting intention is incredibly difficult, really. You thought the walkout was after my video at 12, hence the comment on that video. Is it time to get rid of the Tory plan? The walkout was last night. But nothing really changed this afternoon. Although, you know, I mean, the only thing that's basically, as of this lunchtime, because as soon as I heard that the likes of Ian Wright and Alan Shearer had come out in support, and then a load of others did. I said at the time I wouldn't mind if players and managers refused to speak to the BBC. And then this morning the Premier League announced that teams would not be required to talk to the BBC, because obviously there is a contractual obligation to talk to like the media. But the Premier League, so the fact that the Premier League said that shows just where they think public opinion is. That was crucial for me. The individual football presenters, or people who might have been football presenters, weren't willing to do the show is one thing. But when the Premier League, and if individual clubs had have said, we're not going to talk to the BBC, again, that would have been something else. But for the Premier League itself, the actual, you know, body, to come out and say that its teams do not have to talk to the BBC was because they were fearing a bit of a backlash from fans. And again, they'll know that most of those fans probably are anti-immigration, but it's not about immigration. It's about the Tories trying to shut down a popular football presenter because of political views that they have aired outside of the BBC. And people, whether they agree with him or not, like, for example, I have never called for anyone to be sacked for their political views. There's plenty of right-wing, that people that espouse right-wing political views privately at the BBC and in other, you know, organisations. I've never called for them to be sacked. The only thing I moan about is when they do not allow people, where they don't make it clear what certain people's biases are on a current affairs programme. But anyway, did Starmer say anything interesting in his speech with all the Lineker stuff going on? It passed me by. Do you know what it did me as well? I haven't seen it, in all honesty. I know he was pushing the devolution plans, as you would, just as he did in Scotland, but I haven't actually caught up with the speech yet. There'll be a transcript somewhere on Labour list or something. I'll catch up with that at some point. Clearly have a dominatrix cat. No, we just have a thick cat. She is actually thick. Yeah, because cats are, and I've known a lot of people with cats, and cats are generally quite clever. This one is not clever. I mean, she's cleverer than the pugs, but that's not saying much. Pugs aren't stupid. They have messed up teeth and respiratory system. No, they're stupid. They're incredibly stupid. But ours, I think, are stupid even for pugs. I think ours are below average pug levels. What is this? What have I missed? What are my views on calling radio stations such as LBC as they're causing polarisation? Are they causing polarisation? The thing is, it would be lovely if news media was rigorously impartial at all times. But I gave up on that idea a long time ago. They're not. You know, the Daily Mail, the Times, the Express, the Telegraph, the Sun are all owned by right-wing authoritarian people who use those media outlets to push their agenda. So those outlets are also all of those things. The Independent also is, but the Independent does actually have some editorial independence. But so I long ago gave up on the idea that news media would ever be properly itself impartial. But what I don't mind about LBC is they at least have a mix of people on it. So, you know, you can, if you are left wing or liberal, you can listen in to James O'Brien, who is very good at what he does. If you are a right wing nut job, you can listen to Nick Ferrari, knock yourself out. And they've got, you know, others as well. You can sort of listen to the one you want to listen to. I think that's as good as I can hope for, unless legislation is introduced which somehow deals with it. In terms of, you know, LBC at least provides a range of views, whereas the BBC does not really. Well, it does provide a range of views, but not the range of views. It doesn't cover, you know, I mean, I'm not saying LBC cover the full political spectrum, but it at least covers the majority of the bell curve on left and right, as well as up and down. BBC does not do that. Virtually all the BBC's correspondents have been Tories, going back to Robin Day, Paxman, Robinson, Kingsbury, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and that's fine. But not all of them were political in their jobs. This is what I mean. I don't mind them being conservatives. Although you would think if the appointments process is robust, you'd think some of them would be, you know, at least left-wing, if not Labour supporters. But whereas Kunsberg is overtly political, you know, someone like Paxman wasn't. He used to put Tory ministers under the gun. Even Andrew Neil did, to his credit. You know, even he would put Tory ministers through the ringer if they dared face him, which Boris Johnson did not. You know, same with Nick Robinson. You know, he will ask robust questions and he will call out something that doesn't sound sensible. You should hear what the cats and dogs say behind my back. I don't care what the cat says. And the dogs love me because I keep giving them food. Oh no. When you said you had a cat for over 30 years, you mean cats. Okay. I don't want our cat. You know, I don't wish it any harm. In fact, I do try and do nice things for the cat. I don't want it to live for 30 years. Did I catch Alistair Campbell on the BBC? Yes, I did. He's always very good. In fact, you know, any BBC presenter, correspondent, whatever, that tries to put him in a box, as this one did, should know that they're on for, you know, I mean, he was Tony Blair's spin doctor. He was a very clever man. And he also and spin doctor, you know, basically what we would call now an advisor, or what we used to call an advisor. They were only spin doctors when Labour were in power, weren't they? That was funny. But anyway, very media savvy. You're not going to get the best of Alistair Campbell easily. Red Dwarf or Blackadder? Blackadder. Blackadder has never failed to deliver. Red Dwarf was good for like the first 5 series. Admittedly, that's more series than Blackadder ever had. Maybe their 6th one would have been rubbish, I don't know. But as it stands, Blackadder, all of the Blackadder stuff is good. Red Dwarf, only up to a point. You're just thinking, what would a 2-dimensional bell curve look like? Well, I realised it was just a bell, yes. Sky might not like the Lineker political view. ITV seems more likely. Maybe, it depends. I don't know what the governance of Sky like. Obviously, we know it's owned by the Murdoch Corporation. But at the same time, you know, I mean, Fox has The Simpsons on it. They're about the ratings. They make business decisions. If they can get, you know, if Gary Lineker is a big draw, then and they can get more subscribers with Gary Lineker on Sky, then Sky will try and get Gary Lineker, because he doesn't air his views on their platform. That's the thing. You know, even if they get Gary Lineker sacked, and by the way, that will mean him suing the BBC, so I don't think that's going to happen. Can you imagine, you know, how on earth is that going to stop him expressing his political views? It's not, is it? Because where were his political views expressed? On Twitter. So how does sacking him from the BBC stop that? It doesn't. It's a nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense. But anyway, will Starmer try to change the media? We keep being asked this. The answer is yes. I don't know exactly how. I would have thought one of the easy ways to go is to ban foreign ownership of news media, as has happened in the United States. That would be where I would go for first, I think. Obviously, I wouldn't just do it off the top of my head. I'd want, you know, cleverer people than me to work out ways of doing it easily. But Starmer is known to have had a massive issue with the way the media has conducted itself. Again, I keep saying, he as Director of Public Prosecutions, he tried to go after a lot of editors during the phone hacking scandal. He didn't get them all either. He didn't get Dacre, he didn't get Brooks. But anyway. First season of Blackadder was worst by far. It was good. It was just not as good as the others. But that's because they got Ben Elton involved, and then you had the... no, sorry. It was... Hang on. Was it? Because it was Ben Elton and Four Weddings guy. Forgotten his name. Anyway, one of them did the first one, and then they became a double act in the second lot, and then it was much better. But the first one was still good. I still watch the first one every now and then. But anyway, I can always tell on panels who the Tory MP is. They have a rabbit in headlights looking on the defensive, just waiting for the nervous ticks. Well, these days they are, because they know that, say, even the audience are turning against them, and they know that. So for all this talk, you know, when you've got Tory... Richard Curtis, thank you. When you've got Tory MPs saying, oh, well, I'm knocking on the doors, this is the view I get from people, it's always rubbish. I keep challenging them. I keep saying, okay, you do it again next weekend, please. Take a local reporter with you so that we can see this for ourselves. Curtis did first, then Elton joined. I thought that was the way around, yes. Yeah, it's... God, I've got distracted now by Blackadder and Red Dwarf. Right, hang on. Let's go back up here. But yeah, when Tory MPs are knocking on doors, they're not getting what they like to. They're getting a right godful. And so, but on question time, they can't hide it. They've got a 52% chance of it being a Brexit voter, and they still can't. They still get savaged every single time. Andrew Neil quit GB News quite quickly. Yeah. Yeah, it was not a good launch, was it? Say, to hear me dismiss, I have not dismissed Red Dwarf. I've just said it is inferior to Blackadder. It was just not very good from season 6 onwards. Season 6 was not actually disastrous. Season 7 was really not good, but after that it was terrible. I'd like to see a system like Germany where the media cannot be foreign owned. Media owners have to be UK resident or limited to a max shareholding 5%. I'd certainly want something done with the ownership. Yes. That would be an easy way to get rid of Rupert Murdoch for a start. Murdoch's a bit distracted right now. He should be a bit dead right now. I don't wish him dead. I mean, come on. Who keeps reanimating him? Starting to see parallels to Russian state media and the BBC. Ultimately, like, I think having a national broadcaster is a very good thing. A state broadcaster is a very good thing. But you must not have it under state control. It's very much like the police. You need the police, and of course the government are going to have some sort of oversight over them, but it shouldn't be the government having all this oversight over them. It should really be Parliament. I think there needs to be more. There are things for which that Parliament needs to say, government, this is your area, you need to act on our behalf. But you have to have an understanding that the government does not represent Parliament. It only represents a bit over half of Parliament. That's the problem. So the government should not have as much power as it does have. Parliament should have more oversight over things collectively, because the government never represents all of Parliament, or even the vast majority of Parliament. Although, you know, with polling the way it's been, in theory Labour could win a lot, but it won't. But if Labour won like 500 seats, then all of a sudden, for the first time, for the first time in a long time, we would have a government that is representative of the vast majority of Parliament. But in reality, that won't happen. You know, we have a government that represents one party, a party that has potentially just over half the MPs. That is not at all democratic. Long thought we need an honesty law. Public statements need to be accurate. Yeah, it's a tricky one to enforce, and also to put it into place, you would need politicians to basically outlaw lying. Sure, I see politicians doing that. Why can't the Tories be more in touch with reality? So the way I would look at it is this. If you can think of it as like Brexit. Why are not more of the government intelligent, pragmatic people? Because intelligent, pragmatic people cannot get on board with Brexit. They can accept it as a reality, but they can't get on board with this nonsense of Brexit benefits. Even Labour, for all of their make Brexit work, are not saying that Brexit is inherently good. Like Wes Streeting, I think, attracted a bit of criticism in the last week by saying about not joining the single market, and he came up with some rubbish. Oh, we shouldn't be joining the single market because it would create uncertainty for businesses, and we need to give businesses certainty. Now that's a load of rubbish, of course, but and people quite rightly attacked it. But what I noticed was he didn't say that there are advantages to being outside the single market. He just said there's a difficulty in the process. There is a difficulty in the process, not what he identified. But he was not saying that it would be bad to be in the single market. And nor has anyone in Labour, or at least no one official. So, oh no, I'm getting a series of these. Family Guy or Rick and Morty? Family Guy. I've barely watched Rick and Morty. It's like, all right, it used to, but. But anyway, James O'Brien, LBC, refused to engage with the Lineker saga, calling it a massive distraction, drying out the important voices from the international community opposed to the government's immigration bill. I agree with that. I would agree with that. From news organisations should not have gone with it at all. It is a distraction, and that's why I defended today some politicians who were saying Gary Lineker shouldn't have said it. And people raged about it. Well, it's true though. It's like, yeah, it is true. But it also allowed the Tory, and I don't blame Lineker. I want to, like, if you put it like the shoe on the other foot, like imagine Gary Lineker's there watching a politician playing football. So let's say he's watching a group of politicians play football, and then one of them has a shot on goal and it's saved. And Lineker may go, you had someone on the other post free and clear, why didn't you pass to them? So what you would say of that politician is they got it wrong. They should have passed it. But you're not criticising them because they're not professional footballers. And it's a similar thing with Lineker. I'm not criticising him, and nor I don't think was anyone apart from Tories. But the way he said it allowed the Tory press to confect this shitstorm over the last week. And, you know, as James O'Brien correctly says, it has distracted from a proper focus on the policies. Whereas, and I said this in my video today, if he'd have left out that comparison, because the thing is, like, even if it's true, whenever you have an argument, particularly on the internet, and you compare anyone to anything to do with the Nazis, you instantly destroy any reasoned debate. That's the problem. Even if it's true, people saying it's true, it is true. Every word that Lineker said is absolutely accurate. But it also allowed the Tory media to kick up this fuss. Whereas if he'd have said what he said without the comparison, then if the right-wing press wanted to take issue with him, they'd have then had to start talking about the policy. Should Labour boycott GB News Talk TV? It gives the channel credibility they don't deserve. No. Whether they want to or not is up to them. I don't think politicians should ever boycott any news organisation for the simple reason that you're not doing it, you're doing it to get through to their viewers. Now, you could argue maybe don't do GB News because no one watches it. And I don't think Talk TV get many. If they want to do it on that basis, that's fine. But I would never say on principle that politicians should boycott any media outlet because you're trying to get through to viewers. The only time I would ever say boycott it would be if you know it's just going to be turned into a circus. That's fine. That's absolutely fine then. So if, like, I think someone refused to go and be interviewed by Lawrence Fox a few weeks ago. That's fine because he's not at all serious. But generally speaking, I wouldn't say, politicians should choose it on its merits. If by going on that outlet they are able to present a point of view to the viewers or the readers, then do so. If they don't think it's going to achieve that, then feel free not to go on. Isn't there some rule about Reddit and Nazis? I've no idea, but what I would say is Godwin's law basically says that any argument ultimately descends into a comparison with the Nazis. And this is the problem. He never mentioned the Nazis, no. But by mentioning 1930s Germany, it then comes in. Like Swella Braverman then started saying, oh, you shouldn't be comparing us to the Holocaust. The Holocaust is really serious. It's like, which decade did you think the Holocaust occurred in, Swella? You say you're offended because your husband's Jewish. Which decade was the Holocaust? Remind me, was it the 1930s? No. Most of it wasn't even in Germany. So it certainly wasn't 1930s Germany. But the thing is, as soon as you say that, without using the word, you create, because we know that the right-wing press are not reasonable. They're not reasonable. You give them any in at all and they will take it. But as I say, it's not a criticism of Lineker. He's not a politician. He's interested in politics, current affairs, but he's not a politician. He's not necessarily conscious of political strategy or anything like that. So, it's not, but nonetheless, if he'd have just said it in a different way, then the result could have been much better. Because although some people, and it's very exciting, don't get me wrong, some people are relishing the fact that the BBC have bitten off more than they can chew here. I mean, two things I would say about that. First of all, it would still objectively have been better if we could have had a sensible debate in the media, or some sort of debate in the media, and Match of the Day would still be on today. And secondly, we still don't know how this is going to work out. I still have a very bad feeling that there are people in the BBC who want to bring it down from the inside. So, has there been an upturn in the economy in the last month, as some outlets are saying, or is it more misuse of data statistics? No, the economy has done better than was originally thought. It hasn't. The recession that was feared doesn't seem to have materialised as yet. It may not do. Again, it's still very low base. Again, there's no real difference between 0.3% growth and 0.3% contraction. One, if it happens for half a year on average, is a recession, and one of them is growth. But in reality, it's basically a stagnant economy either way, which it has been for years. Yeah, Brad there with the old, if someone says it's raining, another says it's dry, the job of a journalist, not to quote both, it's to look out the window and see is correct. BBC needs to learn this. Yes, indeed. getting two people on with opposing views can give the audience the impression that that the issue is evenly split, whereas you might get two economists on, and one of them represents 99% of economists, and the other one represents the 1%, and they're presenting it as if they're like both equal, and it's not. But what I would say is, you know, you've got to, if you're going to make a political statement as someone who has a lot of reach, it would be better. I'm not saying Lineker should do this because he doesn't have to, he's not a politician. But it would be better if they thought to themselves, how can the Daily Mail twist this? Think that. How can the Daily Mail twist this? As soon as you've got it into a shape where you don't think they can, then publish it. Remember how Braverman treated an actual Holocaust survivor, well, several in fact, yes, who asked her to stop using 1930s German language, i.e. invasion, swarm, etc. Dismissed her, forgot a Jewish connection that time. Yes, indeed. But again, the media don't place a lot of, they won't really report that much. Robbie Gibbers actively campaigned against the BBC. Yes. Well, this is my worry, that it looks like a right mess. It looks like the BBC have messed up royally. But there's, and I'm sure they did not anticipate this level of solidarity. But at the same time, I do worry that there are some people looking at this and going, this is turning out nice. This is working well. False balance equivalence is the issue in media. That was the issue on the BBC for a long time. So for a long time, it wasn't actually being biased, not consciously biased. It just had a warped vision of balance. It felt that everything was a matter of opinion when some things are not. That was the problem with the BBC. It wasn't conscious bias. It was, and this is from people who worked there and who've called the problems out. It was a culture of not understanding that some things are just fact. You know, if you are struggling, if you've got someone willing to talk about a thing and you cannot find an independent expert to give the counter view, the BBC really should have learned that that's because there isn't one. Because people will go on the BBC, why wouldn't you? The BBC can attract not just this country's but the world's experts to appear on it. International renown. Used to anyway. So if they cannot get, sometimes they'll interview people from California or Tokyo, for goodness sake. If they cannot get an expert to argue a particular position, it's because it's wrong, and they should just understand that. If Lineker said it a different way, it wouldn't be being discussed now. No, that's fine, but there's plenty of other people saying the same thing. That's what I mean. You know, other people were saying the same thing. So what should have been a row about the government's immigration policy turned into a row about whether you're allowed to call Tories Nazis or not. Not helped by people who said, well, they are Nazis. It's like, yeah, but he didn't call them that. But anyway, the early signs of fascism are essentially the Tory manifesto. They've ticked quite a lot of boxes on the road to fascism. We're not there yet, and I now don't think we are. Does Braverman scare me? She doesn't scare me now because she's in power for what? Because what she's doing at the moment, I fear for the fact she's made an enemy of vulnerable people, and vulnerable people are going to suffer. But she's gone in a year or so. In a year and a half, she's gone. And I'm not going to pretend it's all sunlit uplands from there. You know, we've had enough of that. But she will be gone. What about David Attenborough's episode being pulled off the TV due to its coverage of climate change impacts? Yeah, well, as I said, what that indicates is that the rot that's been in the BBC for quite a long time now, which was entirely contained within the news team, is now not. It's now they're everywhere. If in the same week it's hit their educational science content and their sports content in the same week, that to me is a sign that something has snapped. Something has now broken, like a dam has broken in the BBC. The problem with Lineker is around 9 million followers on Twitter. Well, it's not a problem. Quite useful. He's a lot closer to that 9 million than he was yesterday as well. Let's see if it's even closer now. No, it's still about the same. But he gained quite a lot of followers, tens of thousands of followers in the last 24 hours. But anyway. Creating false equivalence, like when they had Pascal Lamy to argue against the WTO and Andrea Leadsom to argue in favour, Lamy being former head of WTO. Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, again, things like that. The BBC really should have much more robust guidelines. Maybe this is something Labour could do. Much more robust guidelines. If you're going to discuss something which requires expertise, you must have a proven independent expert, and the guidelines must state if you cannot get someone who is clearly, unimpeachably an independent expert to argue a particular point of view, then that point of view is invalid. And you should not ever get politicians to take part in a discussion which requires expertise. Politicians can discuss policy. That's it. You do not allow them to come across as if they're an expert. Now, some politicians may be experts on certain things, but they don't need to be. But the BBC should have guidelines that says an elected politician should not be considered an expert on anything. They should only be invited to discuss policy, not ever argue as if they're an expert. Brexit green shoots turned out to be turnips. I made my partner some turnips now. She'd not had turnips before. I don't like turnips, but she's low carb, so someone said that you can like roast them like potatoes. Now I did myself roast potatoes today. We had gammon actually, oddly enough, and what was it now? So yeah, they didn't roast at all like potatoes, although my partner says she quite liked them, so that's okay. But I may try doing them next time without boiling them first. In my opinion, does Starmer's 5 missions contradict his 10 pledges for Labour leadership? No, and I'll tell you why. 2 reasons. First of all, Starmer didn't have 10 pledges for the Labour leadership. He had 2 pledges and he had 10 positions. I keep saying that. I seem to have to say that every week now. There were 10 areas where he stood. Now, I'll grant you there's a heavy implication that they would also translate into Labour pledges at the election, but that's not what he actually said on the document. There were 2 pledges: unite the party, win the election. Well, he seems to be on for both. In terms of the missions, though, remember those are about winning the election. They're about what the government does. And I will keep saying I will never attack a politician for pursuing policies that are not their own. This idea, and I've said this last week, but I'll say it again, this idea that a political party should adopt the policies of the leader means one of 2 things. It means either you can only select a leader who is where the majority of your target voters are, which means for Labour you could only ever elect a centrist leader. Now, I don't think that's right, so I don't support that. The second possibility is that you end up pulling the party away from those voters. Well, if you support that party, I'm not in favour of that either, because it means you'll lose. So, no, if you need the party to be where the voters are, You do not need the leader to be there, but you need the leader to make sure the party is where the voters are. That will mean that the leader has to adopt policies they don't necessarily agree with. As long as they're not, obviously a party has core values, they mustn't be completely out of tune with that. But you have to make sure that your party appeals to enough of the public to get you elected. It's really that simple. GB News gets 700,000 views on YouTube. Let's have a look at that. It's a bit rubbish if so. Let's have a look. Compare. Go away. Compare YouTube channels. Is it literally called GB News? Oh, hang on. Why isn't this working? There we go. No, hang on. No, I'm gonna have to find it now. I have found a GB News on Social Blade, but it's a comedy. It's listed as a comedy program, which I don't think is. It is, but I don't think that's the intention. Let me have a look here. Oh, go away! Clicked on the wrong link. Hang on. GB News. Let's have a look. There we go. All right. Okay, I see what the problem is. So it's all one word, GB News. There we go. Average viewing time for GB News channel is less than 2 minutes. Oh, what's mine? Mine's more than that, I'll tell you that much. My average duration, where do I find it? Hold on. Get off. For goodness sake, it's messing me about. Is 7 minutes and 21 seconds. And my programs are much shorter than theirs. So, yeah, proportionally, that's much better. Right, so yeah, I've got a better rank than they have. They've got way more subscribers but way fewer views. So I've got 160,000 subscribers. They've got 704,000. They've got way more views than I have as well, bizarrely. Oh, hold on a minute. Hang on a minute. No, I'm looking at it the wrong way around. No, they do have more views than I do. I was going to say, how did they have all those numbers and it not be more than mine? Let's have a look here on their YouTube. They seem to do better on the YouTube channel than they do their television program. Oh no, they get loads of views. It just must be that they put out, if I was to have a look, I'm going to guess they put out crap loads of videos a day. Yeah, each individual video doesn't get that many views, but they just put out loads and loads. They just clip lots of different sections, don't they, and put them out there. That's the way to do it. 700,000 bots. No, they do. They get loads. Oh, absolutely. If I had these views, wow, I'd be loaded. Absolutely loaded, I tell you. Have I read a book called The Crisis of Democracy? I'm not sure. They say Blair gave the country hope and a vision of a better future. Starmer isn't inspiring. No, I would agree with that. But I do sometimes wonder if that matters now, because people were given, when Blair gave them this sort of inspiring hope, so to speak, he sort of delivered on quite a lot of it. It will never, you obviously hype yourself up to an election, so you'll never deliver on everything that people were hoping for. But generally speaking, they delivered. Now, what has been the recent inspiring hope? Brexit, but that's turned to hell. So I would say that maybe people would be, you maybe wonder if people would be mistrustful now of a grand vision. He certainly doesn't have it. He's not got the personality to invoke that inspiration, I'll grant you. And I have thought for quite a while that that it's a problem. But now I'm not so sure it's even a problem. I mean, it's clearly not enough of a problem, but I'm not even sure it's a problem at all now. But anyway, right, we've gone over. We'll have to finish off the last few. Dan Wootton is either politically naive or just a Tory troll. Could be either. It's really hard to tell. You know, when someone, who was it? Oh no, this will be another Mark Twain thing or something, won't it? I can't remember. Something about, you know, it's incredibly difficult to persuade someone of something when their paycheck incredibly difficult to teach someone something or get someone to know something when their paycheck depends on them not knowing it. Guardian reporting the Lineker scandal is threatening the government. I don't think I would go that far. As in threatening the what? Threatening the government, as in threatening to bring it down. I don't think so. The fact that Rishi Sunak has basically come out tonight and gone, nothing to do with me, after saying nothing at all yesterday or most of today, is an indication to me that he does not want this coming back to Downing Street. But we will see. We will see how it goes. I'm going to do one more video on the BBC thing tomorrow, which is going to include the domestic abuse support and the David Attenborough thing. And then I'll leave it there and we will see what we will see. Blair was okay until he decided he was the next Messiah. Yeah, it is the problem, isn't it? It's called in science the curse of expertise. So like, last point here, because I like doing this. So Einstein, for example, was a famous idiot. He just happened to do some brilliant things as well. And, you know, he would insist, for example, that the universe couldn't be expanding. Lemaitre did the maths, said, Albert, the universe is expanding. Look at this. And he went, no, your maths is rubbish. And he went through it all and went, right, well, your maths isn't rubbish. I can't find any mistakes, but it's clearly wrong. So, no. And then later on, when it was discovered with data that the universe was expanding, he went, oh, well, I got that a bit wrong, didn't I? And, you know, and then he did the same thing again later anyway. But it's called the curse of expertise in science. This idea that when you are brilliant and very clever and things like, you know, when you prove yourself, that people will ask for your opinions on things that are not really within your area of expertise. And you will feel that because you are this great authority, you should have an opinion on it anyway, and so you give it. And I think the thing happens a lot in politics. So Tony Blair, victim of his own success, and yes, I do think he got far too cocky. But anyway, we'll have to call it there. Thanks very much for coming on. We'll be back on again next week, I hope. Until then, have a good evening, and I'll see you later.